Some people brush their teeth very carefully, twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. They floss. They use mouthwash. They scrape their tongue. They even switch to a more expensive toothpaste. And still, a few hours later, the smell comes back. Not always strong at first, but strong enough to make them feel uncomfortable when talking to someone up close. Strong enough to make them cover their mouth when they laugh. Strong enough to make them wonder if they are doing something wrong. And that is where a lot of people get misled. Because yes, in most cases, bad breath really does start in the mouth. It can come from bacteria on the tongue, from plaque, from the gums, from tooth decay, or from gum disease. Research suggests that around 85 to 90% of bad breath cases start there. But not all of them do. There is another group, smaller, less obvious, and often more confusing. That is when the smell does not truly begin in the mouth. It begins deeper inside the body, in the digestive system, in the blood, in the lungs, in the liver, in the kidneys, and sometimes even in the body's metabolism itself. So yes, toothpaste may help with surface odor, but it cannot fix a smell that is coming from inside you. And if you take care of your mouth pretty well, but your breath still smells bad, the real message may not be sitting on your toothbrush. It may be coming from somewhere much deeper. One of the biggest misunderstandings is this. A lot of people think stomach odor just rises straight up into the mouth. That sounds logical, but most of the time, the body does not work that way. The esophagus is not just an open tube that lets stomach odor float upward whenever it wants. Under normal conditions, it stays closed. So in many cases of bad breath that come from inside the body, the smell is not traveling straight from the stomach to the mouth. It takes a different route, a quieter route, a more biological one. It travels through the blood. This is called blood-borne halitosis. That term sounds technical, but the process itself is easier to understand than it seems. When the gut microbiome gets out of balance, or when certain bacteria in the stomach or intestines become too active, they can produce odorous compounds. Some of the most important ones are called volatile sulfur compounds, or VSCs. These compounds matter a lot in the story of bad breath. Some are formed in the mouth, but others can be formed deeper in the digestive system, or during abnormal metabolic processes in the body. Then they get absorbed into the bloodstream. They travel through circulation. They reach the lungs. And when blood passes through the air sacs in the lungs, those odorous molecules can be released and breathed out. So sometimes, you are not just breathing out air. You are breathing out chemical traces of what is happening inside your body. 3 sulfur compounds matter most here. Hydrogen sulfide. This is often linked with a rotten egg smell. Methyl mercaptan. This is often described as a rotting cabbage smell. And dimethyl sulfide. This one is especially important because it is more strongly linked with extraoral halitosis. In other words, bad breath that does not mainly come from the mouth. Bad breath that may come from digestive or systemic causes. Dimethyl sulfide can create a very unusual odor, sometimes sweet, sometimes musty, sometimes harsh, sometimes just strange in a way that does not feel like typical bad breath. And that matters, because not all bad breath smells the same. Sometimes the type of smell is the first clue. Some people have breath that smells like rotten eggs. Some smell sour. Some smell like food fermenting. Some have a musty, slightly sweet smell. Some smell like ammonia, and in rare cases, even like fish. Once the smell starts to have its own character, the problem may no longer be as simple as whether you brushed well enough. One possible hidden cause is SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. This happens when bacteria grow too much in the small intestine. Normally, the small intestine should not hold large amounts of bacteria the way the large intestine does. But when that balance gets disrupted, bacteria in the small intestine may start fermenting food too early. They begin breaking down what should have been digested and absorbed in a more normal rhythm. And that process creates gases like hydrogen and methane. This may lead to bloating, pressure, discomfort after eating, and sometimes unusual breath odor too, especially a smell that feels rotten, stale, or slightly sulfur-like, as if something is fermenting inside. And in some cases, that may be very close to the truth. Another group of causes involves the stomach and the esophagus. One example is GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. When acid and partially digested contents move back upward, a person may notice a sour taste in the mouth, a burning feeling in the chest or throat, frequent belching, and breath that smells sharp, acidic, or unpleasantly sour. But not everyone has dramatic symptoms. Some people only notice that their breath has changed. Their mouth tastes bitter. Something feels off after meals, or they wake up with an unpleasant taste already there. Then there is another condition that can be even quieter. Gastroparesis. This means the stomach empties too slowly. When stomach movement becomes weak, food sits there longer than it should. And the longer food stays there, the more likely it is to ferment. That can create pressure, belching, heaviness, and a different kind of odor. In some people, it may even affect the way they experience taste and smell. So the issue is not only that the breath changes, even the way the person senses their own body can begin to change. Then there is H. pylori, a name many people have heard before. This bacterium is linked with stomach inflammation and ulcers. But something many people do not realize is that it may also contribute to sulfur compounds that affect breath odor. So a person may take good care of their mouth. They may not have an obvious dental problem, and yet, a bacterial presence in the stomach may still be feeding into the smell. Not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently. And that kind of persistence is what frustrates people most, because they keep trying harder at the mouth, while the real source may be deeper down. But the story does not stop with the stomach and intestines. Sometimes breath does not only reflect bacteria. Sometimes it reflects the body's ability to filter and remove waste. Take the liver, for example. When liver function becomes impaired, certain toxins and metabolic byproducts may not be cleared properly. One classic medical term for this is fetor hepaticus. This is a distinctive odor sometimes described as musty, sweet, slightly rotten, or even garlic-like. One compound often associated with it is dimethyl sulfide. That means the smell is not just about food or oral hygiene anymore. It may reflect the body struggling to process what it normally should. The kidneys can also change breath odor. When kidney function declines, urea can build up in the blood. This may lead to what is called uremic fetor, a smell that may resemble ammonia, or something sharp, chemical, or fishy. In these cases, the breath is no longer just a social problem. It may be a signal that the body is having trouble clearing waste. And then there are rarer conditions that still matter. One of them is trimethylaminuria, or TMAU. It is often called fish odor syndrome. This is a metabolic disorder linked to a problem with an enzyme in the liver called FMO3. When this enzyme does not work properly, the body cannot break down trimethylamine the way it should. As a result, that compound builds up and leaves the body through the breath, sweat, and urine, creating a strong fish-like smell. And this point matters more than many people realize, because odor is not always a sign of poor hygiene. It is not always the person's fault. Sometimes it is biology. Sometimes it is metabolism. Sometimes it is a real medical process happening inside the body. And if you want to improve it, you first have to understand where the smell is really coming from. So how do doctors investigate that? Not by guessing, but by figuring out where the odor is coming from and what kind of compounds may be involved. One of the oldest, and still one of the most useful methods, is called the organoleptic test. This is a sensory evaluation, simple in theory, but still considered a gold standard in clinical assessment. The clinician smells the breath from the mouth and from the nose. If the odor is mainly obvious when the patient exhales through the mouth, the cause is more likely to be inside the mouth. But if the person keeps the mouth closed and the odor is still obvious through the nose, that raises suspicion for extraoral causes. In other words, digestive, blood-borne, or systemic causes. Just knowing which path the smell is taking can already give an important clue. Then there are breath analysis devices. Tools like halometer or oral chroma can measure volatile sulfur compounds more directly. So instead of relying only on description, clinicians can look at actual patterns in the gases. They can see which compounds are more dominant, and that can help guide the next step. If SIBO is suspected, breath testing may be used, usually with glucose or lactulose, and this is where the details matter. Glucose is absorbed more quickly, so it is often considered more specific for detecting bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine. Lactulose moves farther through the gut because it is not absorbed. That makes it useful too. But it can also lead to false positives if the results are read too late. Especially after around 90 to 100 minutes, when gas from the large intestine may start affecting the result. So it is not only about doing the test, it is also about interpreting it correctly. If H. pylori is suspected, another useful option is the urea breath test. This test can help detect that stomach bacterium with good accuracy, which is remarkable when you think about it. A hidden microbe in the stomach can leave a clue in the air you breathe out. And that reminds us again that breath is not just air, it is information. And in the near future, that information may become even more useful. There is growing interest in electronic nose technology, also called e-nose systems. These tools are designed to analyze a person's breath pattern, sometimes called a breath print. Instead of focusing on one single gas, they look at the broader odor profile. Researchers are exploring whether this technology may help with earlier detection of conditions, such as lung cancer and certain gut disorders. It is still developing, but the direction is exciting. Because one day, breath may become a much more powerful diagnostic signal than most people ever imagined. So what can actually help when bad breath is coming from inside the body? The first important idea is this. If the smell is coming from deeper inside, covering it is not the same as fixing it. Temporary freshness may help socially, but it usually will not solve the root problem. One practical strategy for some people, especially those with SIBO or IBS type symptoms, is adjusting the diet. A low FODMAP approach may help reduce fermentable carbohydrates that feed gas-producing bacteria. This includes foods such as onions, garlic, beans, wheat, and certain dairy sugars. Reducing those foods does not mean they are bad for everyone, but in the right person, lowering that fermentable load may reduce gas production and improve symptoms, including breath changes. Another approach is targeted probiotics. Not all probiotics do the same thing, and more is not always better. Some strains, such as Streptococcus salivarius K12, Weissella cibaria, and certain lactobacillus species, have been studied for their potential to help reduce odor-related bacteria or improve breath-related measures. That does not mean probiotics are a magic cure, but in some cases, they may help support a healthier microbial balance. And then, there is medical treatment when a clear cause is found. If H. pylori is present, treatment may be needed to eliminate it. If SIBO is confirmed, a doctor may recommend targeted therapy under clinical guidance. This is why the right diagnosis matters so much. Because if the real source is deeper inside, the answer is not simply another mouthwash. The answer is treating the cause that is feeding the odor in the first place. And that leads to the most important takeaway. Bad breath is not always just a mouth problem. Sometimes it is a message from the gut, from the lungs, from the liver, from the kidneys, or from the body's metabolism. So if you have been careful with oral hygiene, but the odor keeps returning, do not just blame yourself, and do not keep covering the signal without asking what may be behind it. A good first step is still to see a dentist, because oral causes are common and should be ruled out first. But if the mouth looks fine and the smell continues, it may be worth discussing digestive or systemic causes with a doctor. Especially if you also have bloating, reflux, stomach discomfort, unusual tastes, or other body changes that seem connected. Because sometimes, your breath is not telling you that your toothpaste failed. It is telling you that your body is trying to say something from deeper inside.